Have you ever heard of Dragon King the fighting game? Initially conceived in 1998 by Masahiro Sakurai and Satoru Iwata over at HAL Laboratory, this 4-player fighter was meant to be an easier, less competitive addition to the genre. But what none of the developers could know at the time was that when their humble project came out in 1999 under a new name and a new publisher, it would go on to define the fighting game genre and alter gaming history forever as Nintendo's Super Smash Bros. It's bizarre to think of Smash as anything other than a competitive giant among fighting games nowadays, but back when it was just an idea in Masahiro Sakurai's head, the original Super Smash Bros. Was intended to be an entry-level version of the genre that any casual player could pick up and enjoy. This was in stark contrast to the arcade fighters of the 80s and 90s that were popular at the time. For the most part, fighting games of that period were all about two people facing off on a flat map. The games were meant to be technically difficult, with several highly involved combos for special moves that players were expected to memorize. And then there was the rising popularity of Mortal Kombat-style gore and hyper-violence. Super Smash Bros., or rather Dragon King the fighting game, was intentionally created as the complete opposite of these titles. Smash was a fighting game platformer hybrid, and the star of the show was its 4-player mode rather than 2-player face-offs. Special moves were only a few button presses at most, and the game leaned into a more cartoony style. This set it apart from its competition, but there was one more aspect needed to really push the game over the edge. Iconic characters. Every fighting game has them, though they're usually created specifically for the game in question. But once again, Masahiro Sakurai was doing things differently. And he had every right to do so. Sakurai wasn't some young upstart off the street. This man created the Kirby series, and he had extensive knowledge working with HAL Laboratory's parent company, Nintendo. He knew that he would have to pitch his new game to Nintendo, so he wanted to create an early version of the game using famous Nintendo mascots as the playable characters. This was an incredibly weird decision. Seeing Mario beating up on Pikachu was not only unprecedented, but would be straight up upsetting to a lot of people. So he had to get permission from Nintendo to use the character first. And Shigeru Miyamoto himself shot the idea down, at least according to rumor. Sakurai was ready to back down, but his partner Satoru Iwata reportedly pushed Sakurai to create the demo anyway. So they did, and they sent the first prototype with Mario, Donkey Kong, Samus, and Fox to Miyamoto. Despite directly going against the orders of a literal living legend, there was no denying that the demo was good. The game was technically sound, the characters were true to their established personalities, and it was an all-around fun time to play, so Nintendo approved the project. Dragon King the fighting game became Super Smash Bros. To align the game with the Super Mario series, and it released to mostly positive reviews on the N64 after an ad campaign many of us probably still remember. The main critique to the game was its strange and unclear scoring system. In an age where health bars were the norm for fighting games, Smash had a percentage total that represented a player's overall damage taken. The higher the percentage, the easier it was to knock a player back with an attack, and a KO was only reached by sending the opponent flying off the map. This feature was intended to give less experienced players more leeway. Since Nintendo leaned into a less gory style for their fighting game, they cast a much wider net for their audience. Unintentionally, that net caught a lot of teens and young adults that could turn just about anything into a competition, and they did so with the game's 2001 sequel. Super Smash Bros. Melee swiftly became the fastest-selling game on the GameCube. Headed once more by Masahiro Sakurai and co-produced by Nintendo legend Shigeru Miyamoto, Melee looked better, played tighter, and was an overall step up from its predecessor. Sakurai felt that the family-friendly gameplay was the sharpest in the series, but that rise in quality was also the spark the competitive scene needed. While the Smash series' platformer elements, simple combos, and unique approach to knockouts were all created to give casual players a better experience, they inadvertently made for the perfect competitive scene. Anyone could play Smash. They might even be good, but being great at Smash takes practice and a not insignificant amount of skill. As early as 2002, tournaments started to pop up for Super Smash Bros. Melee. After a year of infighting over rules, the validity of items, and what exactly constituted a win, a standardized rulebook was eventually put in place. And in 2003, the International Video Game Federation hosted the first corporate-sponsored Super Smash Bros. Tournament, lending credibility to the game in competitive spaces and leading to several years of high-level tournaments. Other companies were starting to take notice of Smash's impact on the scene. Platform fighter clones started popping up all over the place, looking to occupy space in what was quickly becoming a subgenre all on its own. Remember that this was a series born originally out of the desire to give players a less competitive gateway into the fighting game genre. And now suddenly it was being likened to classics like Tekken, Street Fighter, and Mortal Kombat, while creating an entirely new subcategory of challenging fighting games. Smash had become famous for the very thing it was trying to distance itself from. And 2008 Super Smash Bros. Brawl was a response to this growing competitive movement. Once again, Masahiro Sakurai returned to the series. Though he had actually left HAL Laboratory in 2003, Nintendo's new president and Smash's co-creator, Satoru Iwata, asked his longtime friend to return. This time, the game would be developed for Nintendo's new console with online capabilities, the Wii. While Brawl may have been made with online play in mind, its multiplayer might actually be its weakest aspect. Sakurai filled the game with a ton of single-player content and collectibles, including a stage builder, which would go on to become a series mainstay. Combat was easier and more accessible, and the addition of tripping made it so no matter how skilled you were, sometimes your character would just stumble for no reason. This all made for a genuinely fun, casual experience, but it absolutely squashed the competitive scene. Despite this, Brawl would go down in history as the first of the series to cross one very important line: the inclusion of non-Nintendo characters. Which wasn't a hard sell. Other companies were scrambling to have their characters added to the roster. Sega's Sonic the Hedgehog and Konami's Solid Snake would make an appearance as playable characters in Brawl. This marked a historic moment in Nintendo's strict history of brand integrity and identity. The overwhelmingly positive response affected the rest of the Smash franchise in a big way. But nobody knew that yet. With Smash's competitive scene mostly dead in the water since Brawl's release, fans were starved for new content, and they'd be waiting a while to get it. Until 2014 with the arrival of Super Smash Bros. For Wii U and 3DS, which sold well, were received well by critics, and brought some new features to the game, like a new 8-player mode and amiibo functionality, which weren't exactly competitive superstars. It was looking like Sakurai had actually attained his goal. Smash was looking like that casual, fun, beginner-friendly experience he had originally envisioned. Those looking for a hardcore experience were still playing the decade-old Melee. But then, 4 years later, things took a turn. 2018 Super Smash Bros. Ultimate for the Switch would live up to its name as the ultimate experience, not just for casual players, but for competitive ones as well. Seen widely as the best installment of the series, save for Melee, Ultimate outperformed every other game in the franchise in terms of sales and critical reception, essentially taking the best bits from past releases. Its stellar gameplay reinvigorated the competitive scene, while its general chaos made it a fun party game to play with non-gaming friends. And the single-player story mode and collectibles made for a satisfying experience even when playing solo. But once again, Ultimate made history. In fact, it's still making history today, because with every new update to the game, more characters get added to the roster. And the roster, by the way, is monumentally huge. It's become so mundane now to see characters spanning multiple universes all in the same game. But Smash really helped to pioneer and popularize the idea. And Ultimate continues that legacy to a ludicrous extreme. There are 82 fighters altogether, coming together across multiple gaming franchises and companies. This expansive roster, combined with the super tight game mechanics, gave competitive players a lot to work with, and official tournaments are still being held for the game each year. This has helped keep Smash in the public eye, even as the platform fighter subgenre they created has become quite crowded. Games like Brawlhalla, Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl, and the recent multiverses are all gaining in popularity, and none have yet to overtake the king, the creator. But that's not to say it won't get KO'd in the years to come. Masahiro Sakurai has remained an integral part of the franchise's trajectory throughout the years, but he's not exactly looking to continue making games. In fact, he said there are no plans for another installment. Years of hard work in the gaming industry have done a number on him, and try as he might, his original goal for the franchise behemoth he created never really came to pass. So it makes sense that if and when another Smash game comes along, Sakurai may not be attached. And what might a game without him look like? How much might it diverge from the rest of the series? After all, the franchise's most dedicated audience was created completely by accident. Not only by accident, but actively in spite of Sakurai's best efforts. But whether the game was destined for its competitive success or not doesn't really matter, because it also changed the gaming landscape forever by creating an entirely new fighting game subgenre with bold ideas, a cartoony fighting style, and franchise-spanning rosters. So while Smash's success may have been accidental, it certainly isn't surprising. And that's it for today's video. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. If you're still around, make sure you like the video, subscribe to Nerdstalgic Gaming, and let us know down below. Would you like to see another Smash game, even if Sakurai isn't involved?